I love Dead by Daylight. I started playing this game back in the summer of 2018 and have been on and off with it over the years. It's such a unique game that exists because there's no other games like it at all. Dead by Daylight is a 4 versus 1 asymmetrical horror game where you play as either survivor or killer, and you have to either complete generators and escape, or you kill survivors by downing them and putting them on hooks. When you play the game as much as I have, you start to see and hear a lot of opinions about this game, and probably the subject I hear most is the balance of this game and whether the game is either killer or survivor sided. As someone who's been playing for a while, and as someone who primarily plays the survivor role, I usually say the game is survivor sided most times than not, and because of that, this game can never and will never be balanced, and honestly, that's totally okay. First of all, let me try and describe why I say that this game will always be survivor sided. At its core, Dead by Daylight is an unbalanced game because it's a 4 versus 1 asymmetrical horror game, as in 4 survivors and 1 killer, or in other words, 4 people versus 1 person. And when you understand and grasp that concept, the game becomes very hard for the killer to win 9 out of 10 times, especially when each survivor has a chance of running 4 completely different perk setups with 4 different perks. It becomes really tedious to keep up with the perks each survivors have during the match, and I want you to think of a situation like this. Let's say you have a game with 4 survivors and 1 killer. Everyone has around 1,000 hours of game time in their respective role, so 1,000 hours for the survivor players and 1,000 hours for the killer player, and everyone here is trying to win. The killer is pretty good at patrolling generators and knowing when to start and end chases with survivors and when to down them. They also know how to mind game loops and know when other survivors are around trying to be altruistic and go for saves. Now let's look at the survivor. They know how and when it is appropriate to do generators and healing their teammates. They know when to go for unhooks for their teammates. They know how to waste the killer's time by taking them to loops away from generators that their teammates could be working on, and also know how to mind game the killer. Now imagine all 4 survivors knowing how to do that, by the way. No matter what the killer does, whether the survivors are being chased, generator pressure will always be applied and generators will continue to be completed very fast because it's impossible to chase all 4 survivors at the same time. My point is that the survivors at their best will always be better than the killers at their best because the fact that killers have to deal with 4 survivors that have maximum game knowledge is going to be extremely difficult. But guess what? That is completely fine because the formula is very fun and it's also mitigated with another thing that I want to talk about. Now look, matchmaking has always been very weird for this game. Playing either role feels really weird because one game you'll get paired up with or against the best players in the world that know how to do everything and anything efficiently. And then the next game, you'll get paired up with people who probably just bought the game that same exact day. I personally think that the people behind the game have always had problems with the matchmaking of the game because they don't know how to balance it for the killer side of the game. Like the example I gave you earlier, if the killer had to face the best survivors in the world on an everyday basis, they would always lose and almost never get a win. This is why solo queue can be so annoying to play as survivor. By putting people with the worst survivors who probably aren't even the same rank or MMR as you, that gives the killer a chance to actually win the game and continue to play and have confidence in later matches. If you want to play with better teammates, literally just play Survive with Friends, or people you know that have the game so you can communicate with them on what to do. And that's another thing I want to talk about, Survive with Friends teams. Again, this goes back to a 1,000-hour example. If you have 4 teammates that can communicate and give you vital information 24/7, you're most likely going to win the game 9 out of 10 times. Now, even though I said that Dead by Daylight is an unbalanced game, as it stands right now, it's probably the most quote-unquote balanced and fair that it's ever been. This game has always had dumb stuff in it that has made it so unbalanced and unfair to play in the past. The game from like 5 to 6 years ago is damn near unrecognizable now. Almost every single perk in the game has been changed in one way or another, and different add-ons and items have been consistently changing in order for the game to be more fun and fair for both sides. The meta has been shifting all the time with every new update. Over the years though, survivors have had so much stronger tools than killers for surviving. A couple of these include, but are not limited to, Old Dead Hard that literally gave you distance and immunity just for being injured. 2 add-ons that insta-heal a survivor and reduces charges on medkit. Flashlights blinding the hell out of killers for insane amounts of time. Being able to complete generators in a literal press of a button with the new part add-on. Being able to completely sabotage hooks and make games impossible for killers to win. Not temporarily sabotage hooks, completely sabotage hooks. Killers' movements for the longest time were always slower than the survivors. Self-healing extremely fast even without the insta-heal add-on. Boon totems that survivors can self-heal and do other really stupid things. Survivors literally having infinites on loops that killers couldn't catch them on. Oh, and one more thing. Old Medal of Man. Honestly, one of the dumbest ideas for a survivor perk to ever exist. But don't let this list of survivor things make you believe that killers didn't have stupid stuff as well, because trust me, they did. Such as, you were able to Mori players as soon as you downed them. Not after hooking them, just straight up downing them. The nurse, who has always been the strongest killer, at one point, if you use all of the correct add-ons, could use 7 blinks to kill survivors. They had old Hex Ruin, which literally stopped generator progression if you couldn't hit your great skill checks. They had old No One Escapes Death, which was pretty much No One Escapes Death now, but it wasn't a Hex Tome, so it was much harder to deal with. The Legion on release was an absolute tumor of an experiment, promoting tunneling and overall very toxic gameplay. Also, borrow time wasn't built in and instead was a perk, so downing someone as soon as they got unhooked was a valid strategy for killers to confirm kills. Even though I was able to list both very toxic things for both survivors and killers, I had way more things to say about survivors, and also, there were 4 survivors who could abuse these exploits at any given time when those problems were around. Thankfully they aren't anymore, but back then it was still possible for it to all happen. Now all of this is in the past, and the game is 100% better off with these changes because oh boy were these mechanics awful. Even though most of the broken stuff from this game has been patched to great effect, the game's main core is still unbalanced. And that's fine because that imbalance is what gives this game its very fun gameplay. As a survivor, having to look over your shoulder when completing generators to make sure the killer isn't on you and making decisions like saving your teammate during endgame when everyone is close to death is all very engaging gameplay. And the killer going into chase needed to either commit to the chase and down the player or leaving the player in order to apply generator pressure makes very interesting gameplay and decision making. Just because I say Dead by Daylight is an unbalanced game doesn't mean that it's a bad game. It's still very fun to get in and play a game of Dead by Daylight and try your best to win. And all of the lame stuff that people use in the game, you don't really see all that often. All the toxic builds and playstyles are usually reserved to the really degenerate people who have played this game. Which, yeah, it sucks to play against, but that's more of a problem with the person who's using the build rather than the actual game itself. These perks are usually created in a vacuum and aren't taking account of the fact that they'll be used in a perk setup to get the most value out of it as possible. There are some very toxic builds that people use to stop generator progress or healing speeds or to blind and stun the killer repeatedly. But again, those are just people having fun and experimenting with the tools that are given, not exactly a problem of the game. Like I've been talking about for most of the video, the main reason why Dead by Daylight isn't a balanced game is because of the 4 versus 1 aspect of the game. Even though I don't think that the game isn't fun because it's unbalanced, I think the game could get pretty stale at times and it needs another game mode in order for the game to not feel monotonous or repetitive. I know that the game has had its 2v8 mode, but for one, it was only available for a limited amount of time, and also it still follows the same format of the irregular 1 versus 4 game mode, but with just more people. I would love to see these 2 game modes implemented in the game. A prop hunt game mode, or 1 versus 1 or duel game mode. They both speak for themselves, but let's talk about them in a little more detail. Prop hunt would be like prop hunt in COD, where a team of 4 would disguise themselves as props, and the killer would have to kill the props. Nobody would use perks, and if you were downed, you were eliminated from the game. If the killer can't find the props within 10 minutes, the props win. And if the killer finds all the props, he wins. It would work like how regular DBD would work. You would have to hit someone 2 times to down someone, and if the prop or survivor somehow managed to escape, they could be healed by other props. Also, props would still moan and grunt if they were injured, so killers won't have a hard time looking for people. 1v1 or duel is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll dive a little bit deeper. 1v1 would be 1 killer versus 1 survivor. If the survivor can last longer from anywhere that can range from 3 minutes to 5 minutes in chase, they win. And if the killer kills them in that time, then the killer wins. It's something simple, but it really helps remove probably the most boring part of DBD, which is the generator aspect of it. Completing and patrolling generators is probably the most boring part of the game because you're really not doing anything 90% of the time. You're either holding a button or you're going to somewhere and pressing a button to damage a generator. Dead by Daylight is a good game with a lot of very interesting interactions between players that allow players to express how they like to play the game. With that being said, however, this game is not balanced, but that's okay because it's not meant to be balanced. It's supposed to be fun. And with all of the game's licensing and getting new characters, this game will forever expand and become one of, if not the greatest horror games to ever exist. It's the only game to have a concept like this and still be very relevant and fun to play to this day. Thank you guys so much for watching. If I'm being honest, I just wanted to make this video for the people complaining about this game being unfair for survivors because if you play with the right players, as a survivor, you literally cannot lose. Generators are going to get completed no matter what. The killer is going to be distracted for a long duration with no gen pressure allowing the generators to be completed. And on top of that, if you're playing survival with friends, you can literally give callouts to perform a lot of things that you can't do in solo queue. As long as this game keeps its formula as a 4 versus 1 game, the game will forever be survivor sided just because of the fact that survivors outnumber the killers all the time. The only time that killers can win against survivors is if they make dedicated perk builds to stop survivors in all aspects like healing or generator progress, or if they play against noticeably worse survivors. Anyways, you guys take care. I'll be seeing you in the next one.